Hey Kilimanjaro climbers, it's Todd Rielage, your trip leader for the upcoming Africa Fire Mission Kilimanjaro Trek. And this month we're going to be talking about Kilimanjaro weather. Kilimanjaro weather is not out of the ordinary when it comes to standard mountain weather. So if you've hiked in the mountains before or hiked in 14,000 feet conditions and higher, then you probably know what to expect. But we're going to go over some things today. First thing we're going to talk about is temperature. Two main things, temperature and precipitation, of course, kind of work together. But with temperature, we need to realize that altitude extremely affects temperature. So the rule of thumb, though, is every 1,000 feet you climb, you're going to drop about 5.5 degrees Fahrenheit for that elevation. So, I mean, it's just simple math from that point on. This one is if it's sunny. So 5.5 degrees, you lose every 1,000 feet you climb in clear weather. It actually decreases how much we drop if it's cloudy or snowing. So believe it or not, every 1,000 feet, if it's cloudy or snowing, we'll lose about 3.33 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, nothing's etched in stone, of course. There's all sorts of variables that go into this, but that's just a general rule of thumb. If you're trying to figure out where you're starting for the day and what it might be up, 3,000 feet, and what to plan for, what to put in your pack, that's a great rule of thumb to kind of think of. If the weather stays the same, if the clouds stay the same, what kind of temperatures am I expecting? So what does this mean for Kilimanjaro? For Kilimanjaro, this means in Moshi, which is where we start, temps in December are averaging about 80 degrees. Now, when we say average, of course, it's just like here in the States. We could have some really cold weather when it comes to an average, or we could have some really warm weather when it comes to an average. So average temperature is about 80 degrees. If you hit 65 in Moshi in December, that wouldn't be unordinary. That's a pretty good low for them, and it wouldn't be unordinary to hit high 80s during the day if you're having a seasonably warm temperature. All right. Now Moshi is at 2,600 feet. Okay. Now the first day we actually start hiking, the Machame gate starts at 5,400 feet. So when we actually start hiking in up Kilimanjaro, we're looking at about lower 60s to upper 50s when it comes to what we're going to be preparing for. So it's actually a very nice, mild first day climb. Now, depending on what happens, of course, precipitation comes into that, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So once we get up to the Machame camp, it'll be about 50 degrees, maybe a little bit cooler, especially once the sun goes down. We need to be prepared for that. Shira camp is the next day, and we'll hit about 44, 43 degrees, lower 40s when it comes to that second day campsite. That third day camp, when we hit Lava Tower, we'll be at about 40 degrees, and then we'll be back at Barranco camp that third night at about 44, low 40s again. Again, these are averages, so overnight we're probably going to dip down into the 30s pretty easily. And then that final night before we summit at the Barafu camp, we'll definitely be in the low 30s, if not cooler, at about 15,000 feet. And then summit can be anything and everything, right? Summit, we don't have any kind of blockage of wind or precipitation, right? We're exposed on the face of the mountain pretty heavily. So that summit push, the summit going up that day could be anything from 15 degrees, which is about the average, to all the way to some sub-zero temperatures if they're having some crazy cold weather up there. Of course, again, precipitation and wind go into this a bunch. So with temperature, okay, I kind of just named a whole gamut of temperatures we have to be ready for. And so when we go into what do we need to have, how do we prepare clothing wise and be ready for this, that's something you need to keep into consideration. So you're going to have everything from 80s in Moshi, right, to your possibly 0 to sub-zero on the summit. So yeah, think about a lot of different layers and things like that when we start putting together our clothing ensemble. All right, so let's talk a little bit about precipitation. Now, the great thing about Kilimanjaro, and one of the main things that attracts us to Kilimanjaro, is the range of climate zones that we get to experience. We actually get to experience 5 different climate zones, and we're going to have a whole nother video when we get a little bit closer on what those climate zones are and how this affects it. But what we need to be prepared for is the first thing that we actually encounter in coming out of Moshi and at the Machame Gate is the rainforest. Now, believe it or not, when I came up and hiked Kilimanjaro the first time, I went with 3 other friends, and my friends realized we were going through the rainforest, and 2 of them decided not to pack rain gear in their day pack for the first day going through the rainforest. Needless to say, they got wet because there's a reason they call it the rainforest. So we had a good chuckle of that. They were able to get their gear from the porters and be okay. But just know that you're probably going to get rained on Kilimanjaro, so a good set of rain gear is key. All right, just to give you some numbers, Moshi gets about 2 inches of rain in December on average. That's obviously Moshi. When we're going through the rainforest, of course, it's going to rain. It's hard telling just how much. But the summit, when we get up over the freezing temperatures or under freezing temperatures, the summit will get about 10 inches of snow in December total. So not a ton of snow, but there could be enough depending on, if it's an average, right? If it's a light season, we may not see very much snow on the route at all. If it's a heavy season, we may see a lot of snow on the route. The great thing about this is, though, Kilimanjaro's angle of ascent isn't so crazy and that we need crampons or ice axes or things like that you might find on Rainier or some of the other big mountains that people summit. So that helps us still climb in these conditions with just regular good boots and hiking boots with great tread. And then there are also wider paths, so our exposure isn't so great that if we happen to trip or we fall, that we're just going to go tumbling down the mountain. So those are things that kind of set your mind at ease. All right, this really isn't tied to weather, but sun exposure. All right, sun exposure is pretty big on any kind of mountaineering experience. So as we break through the trees, keep in mind that the UV exposure is going to increase. Now, as we climb in elevation and those trees go away, yeah, okay, we don't have the shade anymore, but as we climb and the elevation gets higher, UV exposure actually increases 4% every 1,000 feet we climb. And this is because there's less of the Earth's atmosphere blocking those UV rays and hitting our skin. So sunscreen is a must when we're out there. Any exposed skin, is if you're especially predisposed to sunburn like I am, I definitely put the cream on to make sure that I am protected, because it is not fun trying to climb with sunburned arms, sunburned faces. It tires you out. Everybody's been sunburned before. You know what we're talking about. Great wide brim hat, things like that really go a long way to keeping the sun off your face. And then if you happen to be hiking on snow, the UV rays, of course, can be reflected back upwards. So even if you're wearing a wide brim hat or something like that, you can still get sunburned from the underside of your face, your neck, your arms, things like that. Anything that's not covered. So we would want to still make sure we're using sunscreen for that. And then, believe it or not, everybody's been out there on cloudy days. The clouds don't really block as much of the UV rays as you think. So it might be a bit cloudy that day or overcast. You can still get severely burned if you're not paying attention. Okay, and lastly, we want to talk about wind. Wind on Kilimanjaro is pretty much all over the place. The higher you go, normally, the more wind you're going to encounter. That's just because of the way mountains work. Mountains sometimes produce their own weather systems, and the pressures and things collect on the sides of the mountain, and so you'll get different cloud formations, you'll get different kind of wind conditions that you may not be even experiencing in Moshi. So that's why we need to be prepared for wind gusts up on the summit. It's not abnormal to experience winds of 20 to 30 miles an hour as we climb on summit day. But you know, I'm sure Kilimanjaro's had wind gusts of way higher than that.
There's Uhuru Peak, 19,341 feet. Whoa! Todd and I just left the top. Bakari rocked it, took us all the way up there. And here's a picture of one of the most beautiful places on earth, Mount Kilimanjaro.
Africa!
The roof of Africa.
Of course, safety is paramount. If it's way too much or they're having some really abnormal weather, of course, all the guides will take that into consideration as well. But that's the great thing about Kilimanjaro is if you look at the weather patterns on Kilimanjaro, they are pretty much constant throughout the entire year, which makes it a great mountain to climb no matter what season you're in. They do have rainy seasons on Kilimanjaro. There are two main rainy seasons. They're just going to kind of be getting out of one in November as we come into December. So there's a little bit more rain in December than you might find in, say, June or July on Kilimanjaro. Seems to be when all the crowds come in September and whatnot, and then the rainy season sets in October, November, and that's where the crowds kind of diminish. So I'm pretty confident that we're going to be okay on crowds. When I climbed in November, it was the rainy season, and we only encountered 1 or 2 days of rain, and it really wasn't that big of a deal. It actually made the climbing experience more eventful and enjoyable, and we got great stories because of it. So with that said, if you have any questions, of course you can email me right there. Don't hesitate to ask. We're going to be going into clothing and all that sort of stuff in the next few videos. So again, don't hesitate to ask. If you have any questions on weather or working out or anything like that, just let me know. I'm here to help. Until next time, be safe.